Back in 2015, we aired a program that didn't go over so well with a bunch of our listeners. It was an episode called Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is. It was a conversation between two guys who consider themselves men of science.
If you were a flea and if you could jump in proportion to your size to a flea, you could jump over those 3 large buildings.
This is a YouTube video of Carl Priest. On his blog, he calls himself the Insect Man. He's a retired public school math and science teacher.
That little frog hopper, when it jumps, it's just a little tiny thing that gets on a plant, experiences 400 Gs. An experienced spider pilot passes out at 7 Gs.
He's crazy about insects.
A scientist says they're a marvel of engineering.
In that episode, I noted that the Charleston Gazette calls Carl Priest West Virginia's best-known enemy to evolution. Carl says that's not true. Actually, he claims he's one of evolution's top 10 enemies in the world.
You don't get engineering out of a brainless thing called evolution.
And we also talked to this guy.
I'm Dr. Christopher Keating. I'm a physicist, and I study climate change. When I first became aware of climate change back in the early 80s, I actually didn't believe in man-made climate change. As I became more familiar with the science, I reached the conclusion that, in fact, it is real. The thing that made me feel skeptical at first was the idea that we were significant enough to cause such an enormous change in our environment. That just seemed to me to be a reach at the time.
Both of these guys were promoting contests, kind of put up or shut up challenges about the science they did or did not believe in. At one point, I thought we might be able to have an enlightening conversation and come to some sort of meeting of the minds. Boy, was I wrong. From West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, this is Us and Them. It's the podcast where we tell stories from America's culture divides. I'm Trey K. After we posted this episode back in July 2015, a lot of folks wrote to let us know how I, Trey, handled the whole thing badly. So today we're going to put that conversation under the microscope and see where things went off the rails. We're going to play much of that old episode, and from time to time I'm going to dip in and out and share some thoughts in retrospect. We'll start with just who is Carl Priest? For years, Carl Priest has been a critic of the teaching of evolution. But evolution is just the tip of the iceberg. Carl's got a beef with public schools in general. He's the volunteer state coordinator in West Virginia for an organization called Exodus Mandate.
Exodus Mandate is a Christian ministry that encourages Christians to homeschool, and if they can't homeschool, to go to a biblically sound Christian school. Also, I'm on the leadership team of a sister group called the Operation Jericho Project. Operation Jericho is more aggressive. We actively speak to pastors and churches, and we just tell them if they're not preaching the message to rescue children, they're wrong. They're hurting their church and especially their children.
Carl has a mission to set America's children onto a godly course. And one way to do that is to demonstrate that the Bible's account of the origin of life is reliable. He uses his insect fascination to help convey this message to young people.
I began to see how they tied into creation science. So it just boomed from that point on. My motto is insects, bug, evolutionism. In my presentation, even though it's in churches and I insert scripture and spiritual things, it's still basically science.
I read somewhere that you demonstrated to your students that mathematics proves evolution is nonsense. Without making it too complicated, can you walk me through that?
It doesn't have to get complicated. Seventh graders can understand it. I just showed them the mathematics. I let them bring in probabilities of winning the lottery. And then I got quotes from scientists about the probability of a single cell or a part of a single cell coming about by accident. And it was so far beyond the probability of winning the lottery that kids saw, this is impossible.
Another way the insect man likes to bug evolutionists is this thing called the Life Science Prize Challenge.
The Life Science Prize Challenge is Dr. Mastropaolo puts up $10,000 in escrow.
He's talking about Dr. Joseph Mastropaolo, a kinesiologist and physicist. Mastropaolo advocates for creation science and is willing to debate any and all evolutionists.
His opponent, whether he wants to be called an evolutionist or not, puts up $10,000. They go before a judge. The evidence has to be valid, objective, reliable, and calibrated. That's science. It has nothing to do with the Bible. It has to do with evidence.
I spoke with Dr. Mastropaolo, and he believes that a courthouse is the proper place to evaluate evidence for or against evolution. Carl Priest says his champion is willing to stand before any judge who's available at the time.
And the judge will decide which party prevails. In other words, if they have more evidence for evolution than he has evidence for devolution, or the opposite of evolution, which is real science, they would win the $10,000.
Carl's part in this enterprise is to serve as the doctor's Don King. He tries to set up the fights. He writes letters to prominent evolution scientists like Dr. Richard Dawkins to issue the challenge. Usually, scientists don't respond. Carl posts the correspondence on his blog as a way to publicly goad these scientists into a debate. If a scientist refuses or doesn't answer the challenge, Carl adds their name to a list of debate dodgers. So far, Carl hasn't been able to get an opponent to step into the ring and go a few rounds with his anti-evolution prize fighter. But he says the point is to attract attention.
I'm wanting to reach the people who haven't made a decision, lurkers. They won't make comments, but they'll read them, and they'll think, and they'll go check. Liberals, they still have some hope. When a liberal gets converted to either Christianity or conservatism, they are the best evangelists for either subject. So there's hope for liberals.
Do you have a hope that you can once and for all disprove evolution and that people will say, aha, he did it, and everybody will fall in line?
Evolution's disproved. I think your question is, basically, will everybody believe it? And the answer is no to that, because it's not a head thing, it's a heart issue.
If some evolutionist were to take the life science challenge and they were to prevail and were to prove that evolution was factual, was not a lie, as you believe it to be, where would you be at that point?
I wouldn't be disappointed. I'd just be surprised, but it still would be God had to do it. Evolution cannot occur on its own. It would take an intelligent being to get it going. For example, this is something new I haven't talked about.
Back in the fall of 2014, I was planning the initial episodes of the Us and Them podcast. I was looking for culture warriors that I thought my audience might like to understand better. I'd known about Carl and his battles against evolution and his life science challenge. Also around this time, I was thinking about culture war battles over climate change, and I read this article on Slate.com that featured Christopher Keating.
Basically, I went where the science took me.
Keating issued a climate science challenge that was similar to Carl's evolution skeptic contest. And I got the idea to put them together in a conversation. In retrospect, that might have been the biggest flaw in my thinking. But before we look at my faux pas, let's hear what Christopher Keating had to say back then.
When I first became aware of climate change back in the early 80s, I actually didn't believe in man-made climate change. That did not seem to be really credible to me. The thing that made me feel skeptical at first was the idea that we were significant enough to cause such an enormous change in our environment. That just seemed to me to be a reach at the time.
So what persuaded Keating that humans have a negative impact on the environment? He says it was in the early 80s when he was in a philosophy course, and Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, was required reading. The book came out in 1962 and spurred a reversal of the nation's thinking about pesticides. Keating says it made him aware of the worldwide effects of DDT. That helped him understand how human activity can change the worldwide environment.
Seeing how much effect DDT had on the environment, we are in fact able to change the environment ourselves.
So it seems as though over the years, you seem to be bothered by people who argue otherwise. Can you tell me about that?
I don't object to people that don't believe in it. That's their right. But I do have a particular problem with what I call the denier industry, actively working to undermine the science and deceive the public.
So in your way to address what you refer to as deceit, you have made a challenge, a $30,000 global warming skeptic challenge. Can you tell me what is that challenge?
Well, what I made was a $10,000 challenge. And two of the guys on the Young Turks TV show pitched in $10,000 each and made it $30,000. It was in response, actually, to a skeptic challenge. I think it was in 2007. It was the junkscience.com website. And he said if you could go and prove that global warming is real, he would award $500,000. He came back and he said no one won, and he never gave any reason why. I established my challenge in response to that.
Keating published a book called Undeniable, Dialogues on Global Warming. It came out in the spring of 2014, and his global warming skeptic challenge was mentioned in the promotional material.
All of a sudden it went viral. I was getting thousands of comments, and I think I got close to 100 submissions. The one requirement I had was that it had to follow the scientific method. And that was to prevent people from coming and saying, well, God said so, those kinds of arguments. So they had to prove via the scientific method that global warming was not real. It did not have to be original work. And I responded to every single one of these submissions and showed why it was not a valid submission.
And who adjudicates their argument?
It was my money, so I was the judge.
But you offer a written explanation. Do I have that right?
For every single submission.
And how did they do?
The best ones were really bad, and they went downhill from there. Some were unbelievably bad.
Well, give me an idea of something that would be unbelievably bad.
Well, there was one, I remember they submitted a George Carlin comedy routine.
The planet is doing great. It's been here 4.5 billion years. Did you ever think about the arithmetic? Planet has been here 4.5 billion years. We've been here, what, 100,000? Maybe 200,000? And we've only been engaged in heavy industry for a little over 200 years. 200 years versus 4.5 billion. And we have the conceit to think that somehow we're a threat? That somehow we're going to put in jeopardy this beautiful little blue-green ball that's just a-floating around the sun? The planet has been through a lot worse than us.
My response to it was, George Carlin was a funny guy, and I liked his comedy, but he's not a climate scientist. He didn't even say climate change wasn't real. His routine was, we're all going to die anyway, so who cares?
But you said that basically most of them were bad. I mean, you're telling me that there wasn't one compelling argument, one that made you think, oh, gosh, I'm going to have to pull my checkbook out?
Let me put it to you this way. Basically, this goes back about 150 years. So there's millions of man-hours involved to get us to the point that we are right now. The community of climate scientists are not suddenly going to go and slap themselves in the forehead and go, God, we never even thought about that. So I was very, very skeptical that anyone would be able to produce any kind of science that shows that it is not valid.
And what about the argument of the fluctuations, that where there's warming periods and cooling periods, and we just happen to be in a warming period right now, but that's going to naturally change?
That is one of the most common arguments. What they're saying is we're in a warming period. Warming periods in the past were natural, therefore the warming period today is natural. But it is a false argument. Nowhere has anyone shown that what we are in now is a naturally occurring warming cycle. In fact, when we go and look at the naturally occurring cycles, we are actually in a naturally occurring cooling cycle right now, which is a very scary thought. What that means is that if this cooling cycle stops and turns into a naturally occurring warming cycle, then we have man-made global warming on top of a naturally occurring warming cycle, and things are going to get really warm.
While I was speaking with Dr. Keating, I was in the studio at West Virginia Public Broadcasting, and he was in his home in Central Texas. I invited Carl Priest to come and listen in on my conversation with Dr. Keating.
Dr. Keating, good to meet you over the airways. And as I listened to the interview, I'm very impressed. I think you're a reasonable man.
Well, thank you.
We do have apples and oranges here. You are the scientist, and I'm just a layman. So I wanted to clarify that matter with you.
Okay, thank you.
It was fascinating the way you described some of the responses to your challenge. We found similar things with ours. We've taken a lot of verbal abuse, threats of a lawsuit, and I even had a West Virginia state trooper show up at my door one time due to a complaint from someone that we challenged.
I haven't had a trooper show up at my front door, and on behalf of the scientific community, I want to apologize to you about that. You have a right to go out here and say what you believe, and if we disagree with you, that's our right. But no one has a right to go and start threatening each other and abusing each other over these issues.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I found very little to disagree with as Trey interviewed you regarding reasonable conversations. And as you said, some of your family and best friends disagree with you. That's the same way with me. Now, I'm a Christian, and some good brothers in Christ disagree with me.
Some of my best friends who have supported me on evolution have been pastors and priests. I've had some really great conversations on the subject with men of the cloth. I know many scientists who are devoutly religious. Science and religion are not necessarily in opposition to each other. They are not exclusive.
I did see some differences in our challenges.
Even back then, as I was listening in real time, I thought I was experiencing an us and them miracle. I mean, on the internet and on my Facebook page, I've seen people on either side of the climate or evolution debate just tear into each other in the most vicious way. But here, Dr. Keating was speaking respectfully to Carl Priest, and vice versa.
There will be peace in the valley for me someday. There will be peace in the valley for me, oh Lord.
After a short break, we'll hear just how long there was peace in the valley.
A poodle is a dog, and a dog will always be a dog, always has been, and that's science. That's observational science.
That's your false argument again. Just because the dog will always be a dog doesn't mean the dog's offspring will be a dog.
I'm Trey K, and this is Us and Them, which is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation.
Music lifts us up and brings us together, even when we can't get together in person. Mountain Stage brings you live performances on the air, online, and in our podcast. They remind you how it feels to be in a live audience listening to live music. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find a link to our stations and our podcast online at mountainstage.org.
Before the break, we enjoyed a respectful, maybe even harmonious exchange of opinions between two men with very different worldviews. Was this peace in the valley? The lion laying down with the lamb? I was just about to suggest that the three of us join in a chorus of this tune, but then the conversation took a turn.
I don't equate creationism with Christianity at all. In fact, I think it is anti-Christianity. If you go and look and see what the Bible says and compare it to what creationists are saying, in my opinion, they are not in sync at all. They're 100% opposed. I don't feel that attacking creationism is an attack on Christianity. And I don't want to attack anyone's religious beliefs at all, no matter what that religious belief is.
Well, I'm not going to debate you on whether or not Christianity and creationism go together, but Dr. Keating, I'd like to hear your best evidence of evolution. Science.
Well, I can give you something. I'd give you something real quick.
Here's a mistake some listeners pointed out. As moderator of this discussion, I let Carl coax a physicist who studies climate science into the position of defending evolution. I mean, climate change and evolution are two very different sciences. It was an apples and oranges conversation. But Chris Keating seemed game, and he dove in.
I'd give you something real quick. You get a flu vaccination every year.
Yeah, I do. Now, go ahead.
Flu vaccination is proof positive of evolution. Once you get a flu vaccination, you're immune to that flu forever. The reason you have to get a new flu vaccination every year is because the flu has mutated into a new virus. And so now you have to get immune to that new virus. And so, yeah, there we have evolution going on right there, very rapidly, in fact.
No, that's not correct, Dr. Keating. You started with a virus. You got a virus when it mutates. It's just like you have a poodle and a German Shepherd. They're still dogs. There's a wide designed ability to have variation. But you're never going to have a dog change to a cat. You're never going to have a virus change to a paramecium or whatever it might be.
Over a long period of time, given enough time, you're not going to have a dog turn into a cat, but you'll have one line of life that will mutate into a completely different line of life. And that is documented so extremely well that it's difficult to debate that issue at all.
Oh, that isn't documented, Dr. Keating. It's when you say a long period of time, you're getting into a faith argument rather than scientific. Provide your best evidence for evolution was my question, and you said virus mutation.
That's right.
And I dispute that.
You're wrong, but you're allowed to go and dispute it.
But you're wrong, and I just proved you're wrong because a virus is a virus. Is that a true statement?
And an animal is still an animal.
A poodle is a dog. A poodle is a dog, and a dog will always be a dog, always has been, and that's science. That's observational science.
And that is your false argument. That's your false argument again. Just because the dog will always be a dog doesn't mean the dog's offspring will be a dog.
And what was the ancestor of a dog?
That's one of the things we don't really know. Dogs are basically wolves. Dogs came from wolves at some time, but that's not conclusive. That's not a closed book.
So you don't know, and you don't have any fossil evidence of a dog coming from another creature.
Now wait a minute. Let's be clear. I am not an evolutionary biologist. I'm a physicist, and I study climate change. And so I am not some world-leading expert on evolution. You can't ever go and say, oh, creationism is real because Chris Keating says this about evolution. Once again, that is a total 100% false argument.
Well,
so what you've done in this discussion is you've produced false argument after false argument after false argument.
I'll say the same thing right back at you respectfully, Dr. Keating. You have false arguments. You have imagination. You have millions of years. You're speaking on faith, and now you're dodging to an expert. Well, bring on your expert. Let him give his best evidence.
I want to get in here just 1 second because I guess I could ask both of you. Carl, do you think that you could persuade Dr. Keating?
I think he's a reasonable man, and he's not hopeless. I need to talk to him longer. The issue is not a head issue; it's a heart issue, and I don't know if Dr. Keating's heart is hardened or not.
And Dr. Keating, do you think that you could persuade Carl to believe that creation science is not reliable?
No, he's rejected science, and it is a head issue.
That is absolutely wrong. I have not rejected
science. It has nothing
science.
to do.
I have not rejected science, and don't you say that. That is a bald-faced lie.
I will say it because you've rejected it in this very conversation.
I think you have rejected science because all you could bring up is viruses, and then you dodged to somebody else who's a biologist.
No,
you're rejecting science because of your need to have evolution.
We are in a forum, and you asked me to provide an argument, and I did. Now, if you wanted to go into a course, a semester-long discussion on this, there's all sorts of stuff I can produce. But this is not the appropriate forum for this. This is not some big debate session or anything like that.
But I guess as you can tell, things got heated at this point. Now, this is where I need to come clean on something. I started this podcast with the intention of fostering respectful conversations across the culture war divide. And I really believe that this was and still is my mission. But I need to confess that in the back of my mind, I knew that Carl was a bit of a provocateur, and that it was possible that he might say something that would heat things up, that there would be some tension. I realize now that this might make for interesting listening, but it's not the right forum to get to the bottom of a disagreement about science. And it's certainly not a recipe for finding common ground. In the heat of the moment, I wasn't nimble enough to redirect their angry conversation, but I did my best.
I've known Carl for a while. He's quite adamant. This is an issue that he cares a great deal about, and that he feels that this is a message that needs to go out and it needs to be challenged. And yet, in the same time, I read about your challenge, and it seems as though both of you are really trying to connect. Carl wants a scientist to basically take his and Dr. Mastropaolo's arguments seriously. And I think that you, on the other hand, have either A, gotten tired of other scientists who you believe are distorting the facts of climate science, or just laymen who you feel are producing misinformation. And I guess I'm interested in why it is that both of you have kind of chosen this forum to present your views.
If you have enough people on both sides of the argument, someone's going to do it. And we happen to be the ones in our respective domains that chose this venue.
But you don't think that you're going to persuade somebody like Carl? And I don't think that Carl's going to persuade somebody like you, although he says that he says that it doesn't seem like your heart is hard, although maybe he's changed his mind.
Well, if he'll produce science that shows evolution is not correct, then I would be very interested to see it. Unfortunately, evolution is probably the single most well-proven theory in all of science.
Yeah, that's a faith statement. And Dr. Keating,
that's no faith. There's no faith in that. That's not faith. Science is not faith. You don't believe
is faith,
in gravity.
Not science. Now, see, you equate evolution with science, and it isn't.
It is science.
Not.
It is a rigorous science.
You told me if I went to a semester course.
I'm sorry. It doesn't matter how many times you say that. Science, evolution is still a science.
You said if I went to a semester course, I would be presented with evidence for evolution. Well, I'll tell you what, after this call, why don't you send me your best proof? Why don't you talk to your colleagues who are true believers in evolution, have them send me their best proof. And I guarantee you it'll just be more virus mutations.
I will tell you the same thing I say to the climate change deniers. I am not here to do your homework. The science is out there.
You're dodging.
The evidence is out there. The proof is out there, and it is easily accessible for anyone who is willing to do their homework. I am not dodging. What I'm doing is I'm not letting you take over my life.
You're dodging.
When we originally aired this episode, it got a lot of downloads. It broke our record at the time for the highest number of downloads. An explanation for this bump might be because Carl Priest was pleased with how he came off in this episode. And he alerted many from the evolution skeptic community. We received a lot of positive email from folks who think like Carl. On the other hand, Dr. Chris Keating was not happy with the episode. In an email, he wrote, "I listened to your podcast and I was very disappointed. You told me you wanted to interview me on climate change, but what you really wanted to do was ambush me on evolution. If I had known that this was your intention, I would not have participated. I thought the podcast was strongly anti-science, and I regret being part of it. Live and learn." This was not my intention, and I wrote him back saying as much. I reminded him of my original idea of presenting a discussion of two people with very different perspectives on science and the culture wars. While it might have been more appropriate to have an evolutionary biologist duke it out with Carl, is having a fight really the point? Does that get us to having a more productive conversation about science? We revisited this episode in part to point out how, even with the best of intentions, we journalists can mess up. But I wanted to take it further. I wanted to know how to have a good conversation about something divisive like climate change with someone combative like Carl Priest.
Many of us, both as scientists as well as people familiar with science, are under the impression that if we just give people the right information, surely they will not only change their minds, but they will see the urgency of the action. What I have learned since then, in the many years and even decades that followed, is facts are not enough. It isn't more scientific facts that are going to tip the balance. It is understanding why this issue matters to us personally.
That's Dr. Katherine Hayhoe, a highly respected climate scientist. She's also a devoted evangelical Christian. She lives her life along this us and them fault line. We had a long talk that got at why conversations like the one with Carl Priest and Chris Keating often go so wrong, and how to have a better one. You'll hear that next time on Us and Them. You've been listening to Us and Them. For this show, our team is me, Trey K, Lori Stern, Chris Julin, Catherine Winter, Loretta Williams, and Mitch Hanley. Michael Lipton and Tristan Lozow wrote and performed our show music. Rita Krisafi and Mariana Trofimova provide us with images for the web. The wonderful people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the West Virginia Humanities Council, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. Us and Them was originally developed with the assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
From PRX.